Hey y'all, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to give everyone another minute or two to get settled and join, and then we will kick this thing off. Okay, I think we're good to get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Christina Caesar, and I will be moderating today's session. Today's webinar is the second in our series, How to Secure Your Data, and it will be covering Windows Information Protection this week. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded, and make sure to send any questions through the Q&A function within Teams. All right, so just a little bit about us. Synergy Technical is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have clients in over 70 countries and in all 50 states, and manage over 2 million licenses of Microsoft 365 for clients through our licensing and managed services practice. We excel at securing a productive workforce in complex environments and have been recognized as such. Just this past February, we were awarded the Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year Award. That's a mouthful. A large part of that success is the work done by today's presenter, Adrian Amos. So Adrian is one of our deep level Microsoft security experts and runs hands-on workshops around the nation where end users experience the cybersecurity capabilities of Microsoft's enterprise mobility and security suite. Adrian has had the honor of running both security and productivity workshops at Microsoft Ignite the past 2 years and is honestly just gifted in leading this stuff. So Adrian, without further ado, I will hand the reins over to you whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you so much, Christina. Appreciate everybody joining us today, and all the accolades are great too. Thank you. Today we're going to be talking a little bit, well, actually, this series, we're covering protecting our data, right? We spent time talking about how to protect our endpoints last month. Now we're going to kind of be moving into our data. And last week we talked a lot about rights management, Azure information protection, taking persistent controls around our data and making sure that the right data is seen by the right people at the right times in the right places. So what we're going to do this week, though, is we're going to move into a kind of a, it's not an oddball, but it's something that often gets left out of the security discussion. And that is actually using managed application protection inside of Windows, and that's done through Windows Information Protection. I actually didn't know this existed 2 years ago, and to Christina's statement about having presented this content at Ignite, I learned about this when one of the members of the Windows Information Protection team sat in on one of my sessions and asked me at the end, why don't I cover WIP? Well, I'd never heard of it. My guess is a lot of people out in the wild haven't heard of it either. So let's think about what it really is and what it offers before we go into an example and how to manage with it. In our mobile environments, so we're thinking about our iOS and our Android environments, we tend to think of enrolling systems and protecting them by updating their security XML file, right? So we're either going to have them enrolled in the Android administrator or whatever the work program is now that Android has. Or with Apple, we're going to do a corporate managed Apple fleet, but we're also allowing some users to bring their own devices. And what we've known for a while that we could do was offer a different experience where we have either an MDM for a mobile enrolled device or an MAM for an unenrolled mobile device, where we're simply protecting some of the applications within a secure spot within that mobile device. And we're saying only these applications in that space can talk to each other. WIP is that for Windows. And it doesn't get a lot of attention. So what I want to do is I want to show you kind of how it works, what it looks like from the user perspective, and then we'll dig into how we actually enable it from the corporate management perspective. Because it does offer a couple of really neat things. Like the one thing that I'm excited about is the one question that we get the most is how do I get my data to not walk out the door on a USB key? And this WIP is actually kind of the secret, but it's weird the way it works. So without further ado, I'm going to share screen from my good buddy Diego Siciliani. So if you see me looking over here, I'm Diego. If you see me looking over here, I'm the admin today. So it's going to be a little confusing, and poor Christina is going to have to try to figure out how to keep up with me.
It's going to be fun.
All right, so we should be seeing in just a moment the screen of my good friend Diego Siciliani. Let me know when you can see that, Christina.
Yeah, give me a sec. Let's see.
Oh, looks like it didn't actually share. Go. Uh-oh. We already break it? Oh, wait. There we go. I think we got it now.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so Diego is a normal user inside of Contoso. I've presented as Diego many times in the past in different formats. Diego is our HR manager. He deals with data that is not generally available to everybody in the workforce. Diego represents a different level of risk for our users and our content. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that Diego doesn't have to be an IT expert in order to be able to use his computer correctly. We want to enable some basic DLP. I'm going to use that term. We'll talk about later about how that might fit in with the rest of the DLP architecture. But we want to enable some basic DLP to make sure that Diego stays within the lines of his coloring book all the time and is able to get his job done without really worrying about whether he's breaking rules. But you might also notice looking at Diego's desktop that he has a Google Drive. So we want to make sure that our content doesn't walk out the door, whether through Google Drive or through accidental copying or accidental data leakage. So without further ado, let's dig in and see what it looks like for Diego. Now, if I go into my computer browser or my browser tab here, and I look through my documents here, you're going to see that some of my files have this little briefcase icon. And let me actually go into my documents, and I think I have a view that's big. There we go. That should be big enough to see it, right? Diego has these briefcase icons on his files. What those briefcase icons mean is that they were produced in a place that is protected through Windows Information Protection, whether that's an app that's covered or if it's a save location that's protected. And that's not just going to be for files either. We're going to see some applications actually have it as well. So if I open up Teams while I'm sharing, you can see, hey, there's me looking at me. I also have this little briefcase icon sitting right up here. So any content that's produced in Teams is also going to be protected. But it's not just there either. If I open up my web browser, I'm also, as long as I'm operating within a corporate internal location that we've determined, which is in our case, all of our office spaces, everything's going to have this little briefcase icon. Now, if I go out to another place, let's say apple.com, I shouldn't see that briefcase icon. That's not inside of the space that we're protecting. Now, I'm not here to sell Apple products. I just want to show you that this is a different one. We don't have the briefcase right here. So practically what this ends up meaning is if I'm Diego and I have these great files sitting right here and I want to copy one of them to a USB key. So I'm going to take my USB key and I'm going to stick it right in the side here. If I can get it to plug in. It's a small one, so it's a little fiddly. Let's see. There we go. It's going to pop up and ask me in a moment, what do I want to do? There we go. There's my USB drive. And I am going to say, hey, it would be really great if I could take these R&D and engineering things and copy them to my USB drive. When I let go, I'm going to get an option to copy as a work protected file or copy as a personal file or skip it. Now, I've given Diego some very, very soft bumpers, right? The lines in his coloring book are soft. They're not raised ridges or anything. They're soft. He can decide that he wants to override this, but he's being reminded now, hey, there's a choice I have to make here, and maybe I shouldn't be copying company data out onto a personal drive. Now, I, as the admin, can make sure that he never has that option. He's only given the copy as work protected or cancel. But that doesn't mean he can't move it around with inside the computer. So he's also a Google Drive member. So he's like, okay, well, I don't really want to copy it onto a USB drive, but maybe I want to take these files and I want to sync them over to my Google Drive. Now, I don't want to accidentally move them, so I want to copy them, all right? And it looks like that went okay, right? If I go over to my Google Drive folder, you can see it shows that they're synchronizing right here, but one by one, they're gonna all come back with these little red X's. And we can verify that they're not making their way out to Google Drive by refreshing the view out here in Google Drive. And sure enough, they're not there. So Google Drive is outside of the space that is allowed for saving this content. It's not going to get our data. Now, what if Diego decides that he wants to come back in here and actually just manually grab some content out of one of these things? Let's let him come in here back to our OneDrive documents. Again, not a very good user, so I tend to be a little slow with the pokies and clickies. We're going to come in here to our budget planning session, and we're just going to do this the good old-fashioned way. We're just going to copy some data and drag it into a new location. Let's say, hey, we want to grab this content right here, and we want to right-click on it and say copy. Okay, we're allowed to do that, no big deal. And I want to put it in WordPad. Because WordPad is not one of my protected applications, if I recall correctly. And I'm going to paste, and look at that right there. Your organization doesn't allow you to use work content with this application. So what can I do with this, right? So we've kind of seen how it works. I'm going to steal my computer back or the screen back, and I'm going to show you kind of how we drive to this. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen one. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some policies here in Intune, and we're going to design a solution that allows our users to work with the applications they need to, but actually also have the protections in place. Now, again, this is actually done in the same exact place as doing our MAM policies for our mobile devices. So here's my Android one to prevent data leakage, my iOS one, and right underneath here, these are also my Windows policies. We have to make a choice when we first create one. Is this for enrolled devices or unenrolled devices? So again, this really is actually MAM versus MDM for Windows. This is really Microsoft's approach here. So for me, for Diego, because he's an internal user, I'm going to say this is an enrollment-based policy for computers that exist within this organization, and I can cut it down to as few or as granular deployment as I want to. But this is a choice that will be persistent for this policy. I can't go back and decide later I want this same policy to apply to my unenrolled. I'll have to create a copy. So when I go into my policy, there's not a lot there until I actually click on properties. Once we get into our properties, we're going to be able to see all the fun settings in here. And this isn't really super duper complicated, but there's a part of it that is so insanely complicated that I can see why it doesn't get a lot of attention. Anyway. So we're going to name our policy, right? We're going to decide what kind of data we're going to protect with it. We're going to choose applications that have access to our data. We're going to allow, we're going to determine whether or not we're going to let the users override our settings, or if we're just going to enforce it on them. And then we're going to set some boundaries on this. So allow overrides, whatever. We can do block, we can do silent, we can do turn it off entirely, but what that's going to do is just kind of control the behavior, right? Allow overrides lets them see that there's a thing that maybe they shouldn't be doing. Silent's going to apply the protections quietly without letting them know a lot of stuff. And then block's just going to flat out not let them do stuff. But the real juicy fun part gets here when we start determining what our apps are. When you go in to build these policies, there are actually pre-canned applications that are in here. It's going to say, hey, these are the ones we recommend. Go for it. Go forth. Have a great day. But we can actually come into this and start adding additional applications that we want to be included in this. It's pretty simple. We come into add. It's going to give you some things that are right out of the box. But if you don't see the things that you want in here, it's actually going to allow you to either import them or go in and create custom mappings too. So if I hit add and I want to go off the reservation and hit desktop apps, well, now I have some work to do. And there's actually wildcard support in this too. If you want to do everything that Microsoft has ever published, well, you can actually come in here and put in the publisher name, and it's not just saying Microsoft. It's actually following this canonical name format here. Then we can go in and just put asterisks in for pretty much everything else and run everything Microsoft has ever done. We can kind of go the other way with that. We can build our policies to allow applications the way that we want them to. And then we have to decide whether they are allow or block applications. Do you want to allow this to participate, or do you want to remove or block it from participating? I'm not going to add this right now. Whoops, go ahead and click close. But then we can also decide that we want certain application exemptions. And this really took me some time to wrap my head around. Why would I build a policy to include 30 applications that I want to be included, knowing that if it's not in the list, it is already exempt? Why would I want to add an exemption? Well, it turns out that if you simply take an app that's included off the list, it doesn't necessarily go away from the client's current load. What you have to do is take that application and put it in the exempt list so it republishes out to the users. Then later you can take it off both lists to make sure that the user no longer has old settings. So there's a little bit of a delay in how this works, so that's why they've actually built this exemption capability into it. So I'm going to cancel. I'm not going to do that here. But we're also going to do a lot with our advanced settings. And this is where the really cool stuff around controlling the USB functions and determining which websites are a part of this. What we're going to do here is we're going to come in here and we're going to say, our cloud resources, our neutral resources include a gigantic list of URLs, right? And the formatting of this is not obvious. There's a lot of work that you have to do to figure out what the format is and add the apt compat and everything to make sure that the right environments are protected. There's neutral resources. We can add locations based on whether it's in a protected domain. So if you want all data that's assigned to contoso-supertopsecret.com to be protected, we just add that as a domain. Simple, super simple, right? We can add proxy servers, IP ranges, whatever, to say if it's in this space, then I want it governed by these policies. I don't want it to be able to accidentally leave. We can come in here and actually set up a custom recovery agent so that if things go wonky, we can come back. Because what I didn't cover is that when we actually wrap these protections around the document, what we're leveraging is the built-in EFS, the encrypted file system in Windows, to say this is the protection on this document. So if we want to upload a recovery agent, we can do that. Microsoft strongly recommends that you do that, but it's not required. It turns out it's not even required that you put locations in place. If you just want to say, just protect it, well, you can do that. We can do revocation of encryption keys on unenroll, strongly recommended. Showing the enterprise data protection icon, so getting that little briefcase in all the applications. I really like that because it helps me see where, again, where the coloring book lines are. Where am I going to make, mistakes or have challenges for my users? And then this one, okay. I'm going to zoom in here, right? Because maybe last week you might recall that I spent a little bit of time talking about the history of Azure Information Protection. And this is one of those weird little jobbies where in 2020, you kind of have to know what the technology looked like in 2015 to be able to use it properly. What we came from a million years ago, way back in 2014, 2015, was Azure Rights Management. And that morphed over time into Azure Information Protection. And that's morphing into Microsoft information protection. And it's all moving around, it's all getting changed. And the old rights management engine and all that stuff is scheduled to go away as of March or April next year. But what we can do for documents and files that are marked as being these corporate WIP protected files is we can say when the user decides that they want to put a copy of it on a USB drive, I want to apply an Azure RMS template to that data. And the reason why that distinction is important and why we're not saying Azure Information Protection to that file is that it's actually not using Azure Information Protection. It's simply using the permissions that are designated in the template to determine who will be able to access and open that file once they stick it into their computer. So it's not actually putting the super high level encryptions on it beyond EFS. It's simply using the template to determine who gets access. And that's really important because I can put a file on this thing and stick it into my computer and I won't have access. I'm not on the list, but it's not because I got the full Azure Information Protection job on it. So it's a weird distinction, but it's an important one to understand. And it's one that I kind of hope that we can get around before April 1 of next year, because the way that we ingest this information is by grabbing the template ID. Right now, the only way to get that template ID is to actually go into our classic Azure Information Protection engines, look at our templates, and come into these guys and scroll down to the very bottom, and there is our label ID at the very, very, very bottom. That is the only place you will find that right now. I'm sure you can expose it to PowerShell, but if you're doing this in a GUI right now, there is nothing in the current Azure Information or Microsoft Information Protection space to expose that template ID. So one little wonky scenario that you're going to have to be aware of, but once you put that on there, again, if you've built your templates and you're consuming them through all of your Azure Information policies or Azure Information Protection policies, you'll be able to say, these are the rules that I want, these are the guardrails. And then we can decide whether or not we want to allow search indexer to search encrypted objects. And we can also say that, hey, these file extensions should just always be encrypted by default. Now, you may recall that I had a couple of separate policies and I'm trying to figure out why scroll wasn't working or zoom wasn't working. There we go. We're actually able to control different levels of this based on whether or not it's enrolled or unenrolled. And again, in both cases, we're still using the encrypted file system to do this. I do want to switch back over to Diego and show you just in 1 second, though, how we can what these guardrails look like and how Diego can work with the guardrails. But before I do that, I want to cover assignment of this policy. So just like all of my favorite things in Microsoft Endpoint Management, Intune, whatever, I have a choice. I can assign this directly to a group. I can exclude it from a group, but I can also assign these via policy sets, and that makes me so very happy. I can actually reach into a policy set, which, if you recall from our discussion about endpoints and managing endpoints from last month, I can take all of the policies that I want to comprise my standard image, and I can dump them into there, and I can know that I don't have to worry about whether or not the right users are going to have the right stuff. It's just part of the base load of the image. So let me jump back over to my devices, kind of dialing it back a month here, go to my policy sets. And when I go into my standard image policy set, you're going to see there's an option in here to plug in app protection policies. I don't have one on this particular one because, again, this is Diego. He's a little bit higher level, but we can absolutely plug in the app protection policies right into these policy sets to make sure that everybody gets the right stuff going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to jump back over to Diego. I'm going to steal the screen again here, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when Diego has decided that there is some content that is actually personal, right? It's not corporate data. So we're going to allow him to make some determinations here. All right, so Diego is back in the saddle again. He's got his content here. We're not going to save content production or changes to this WordPad document, and we're going to go ahead and close out of this Word document. So we saw in this default view that everything gets these little briefcase icons when we're in our OneDrive for Business, because OneDrive for Business is one of the protected locations that we decided here. Now, if I decide that this is my personal data, this sales budget analysis is my personal data, I want to right click and say this is mine personally, but I don't have that option. And I don't have that option because OneDrive for Business is a protected location, but downloads is not a protected location. So what I did was I came into my Excel document here, or Excel created a new document, and I actually saved it to downloads. And I had a reason for that, but it's not really relevant to what we're doing today. Downloads is personal space, but this file, you can see it has the briefcase on it. I can right click here though. Oops, let me actually click on the file itself. And oops, again, terrible user. My mouse pad is being a little tricky. Right click on this guy and I can go to file ownership and I can decide that this file is actually a personal file. And again, there's no guardrails on this. Well, there's no guardrails on this particular one because I wanted Diego to have the option to override. Even though this content was produced in Excel, he's going to have the ability to override that and change the ownership. So in a moment or so, that should actually come back up and say that it's personal. And if I want to flip it back, I can flip it back to being a work file. And once it is marked as personal, if I want to copy it over to my Google Drive, it shouldn't give me any guff about that. If I copy this guy over to my to my Google Drive as well, no briefcase on the file, it shouldn't give me any challenges here. So we should see, okay, book 1 is now going over to my Google Drive. Contosal Electronics projects next year's earnings. Maybe shouldn't be personal, but that's what we let Diego do because he's a nice guy. And now if I come out here, I can see that those files have replicated over to Google Drive. This will also allow me, once these files are marked as personal, to go in and copy content out of them and move them into other files. Now there's another trick to this too. So Diego is working in applications that are protected. Windows actually gives us the ability to see how that looks from the perspective of the tasks and the applications that are running. We can come into our task manager and see what is the enterprise context that this application is running in as a user. So we start firing up applications, and for whatever reason we've decided not to turn on the briefcase icon, we can come in here and we can say, oh, it looks like any content I produce here within Teams or any content I produce within OneDrive is automatically going to be saved into my corporate location. And any content that I produce in Chrome or whatever is going to come in and save as personal. Now, anything running under the system context is going to show up as exempt. It's not going to be participating in this Windows information protection stuff. That's totally separate, totally out of bounds. We don't have any real control of it, but we have complete control over whether or not corporate data being produced in corporate apps is available to be moved to personal locations or have content copied out of it into a personal file. It's a pretty cool little thing. Microsoft does not recommend that you consider this to be a protection against malicious sharing. What they're recommending is that you view this as an augmentation to your DLP policies to protect against the most common form of data leakage, which is accidental leakage. So highly recommend people take a look at this. I will tell you, this is actually built on top of AppLocker technology. And if you've heard me talk at any great length about the great capabilities of Intune for deploying applications, you will know that I am a strong believer and that I believe that Intune can do 95% of everything a GPO can do, except this. And I'll spend just a hot second covering what that difference is here. And for that, I'll steal my screen back. There we go, let's steal it, screen 1, okay. So I'm back in my my comfy, cozy Intune environment here, and I'm going to build some policies around how applications are serviced. Weirdly, this is not going to be an application policy, or it's not going to be an apps policy. It's actually going to be a device policy, a device configuration policy. So I'm going to go into my Windows policies, and I'm going to look at my configuration policies. And one of the ones that I have here is MDAC. This is Microsoft Defender Application Control, which is how we manage AppLocker in the cloud. But the experience is a little bit minimal compared to what we can do with a GPO. And I'll show you what that difference looks like in a second. If I come into my configuration settings and I actually come down to my Microsoft Defender App Control section, I only have two things that I can do here. One is I can enforce, the other is I can enable or not enable. And this is determining whether or not applications basically have to be signed. That is the sum total of the built-in control I have around AppLocker. Now, I don't need any additional controls for AppLocker to do WIP, but if you're looking to use WIP as an extension of AppLocker policies and you have a lot of AppLocker stuff done, don't come looking here for a lot of great additional controls. You can build a custom list of applications that will be allowed to run on Windows, but you'll have to create that and upload it as a encoded OMA URI setting in a custom Intune policy. It ain't pretty. And I'm going to show you a Microsoft document, and I don't ever do this, but I just want to show you the difference of complexity between just trying to get WIP running and trying to get WIP running as a part of an overarching AppLocker consideration. If you are looking to bundle all of the applications that should be able to run in Windows and you're prepared to do that in GPO, this document right here, yuck, 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 yuck. Basically everything from the top quarter all the way down through here is stuff you're going to be doing in GPO and on Windows and building all kinds of stuff. It ain't pretty. I don't recommend it. It's massively overwrought unless you have some extremely tight control requirements. What you're going to really want to do is you're going to want to get the basic policy up that says allow the WIP to consume the applications that are a part of the locations and the boundaries that you want users to work with. Add the applications that you want to that. Deploy it, show them the pretty briefcase icon, and let them get working. And it'll be super simple. It's a great additional control that I've only seen maybe 1 or 2 clients using in the last 3 or 4 years that it's been available. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Christina. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. There's not a ton of configuration for WIP, but it's easy to get started, and I hope that we'll be able to help you drive some success in that space. Christina?
Hi, thank you so much, Adrian. That was fun. I was constantly hopping back to and sharing different screens. So thank you everyone for joining us today. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar that you will also be able to find online. And the third webinar in the series is actually next Thursday, September 3rd, and it will be covering cloud app security. And you can register for that on the events page on our website or find it on any of our social medias. Sorry, real quick, did anyone have any questions before I just kind of started talking without? I'll check the Q&A thing here. Not seeing any, but
Oh, actually, yeah, there is one thing I wanted to cover real quick. This is an oddball, all right? And I totally forgot to mention it in my super duper apologies. One of the things we try to cover in these sessions is how do I license this? WIP is actually not in the normal Intune pack. It's actually an Azure Active Directory premium feature. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Fun fact, guys. Well, there are not any questions, but thank you so much, Adrian. You were great about jumping between the two screens. And thank you everyone else for joining us. Like I said, you will get the recording, and make sure to register for the third session next week. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thanks, bye-bye.